For ex-Muslims, their whole branding and image is based on we are liberal, we are tolerant, and we are civilized. Islam isn't, so that's why we left. Then Gaza happened, the biggest moral catastrophe of the century. What we're seeing in Gaza is so obviously repugnant. You don't have to be a Muslim to see it for what it is. An evil enterprise, a genocide.
I find that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the threshold indicating the commission of the crime of genocide against Palestinians as a group in Gaza has been met.
Important because, we're in the midst of a genocide.
If you want to know what an unfolding genocide looks like, open your eyes.
The ICJ, literally the highest court in the world, has said there is a plausible case for a genocide in Gaza. Israel has slaughtered nearly 40,000 civilians, including over 15,000 children. In terms of proportionality, that would be like killing 1.4 million people in the UK. Imagine that. Can you imagine 1.4 million people in any European or Western country being eradicated, and the world is just standing by? You can't. But if you're a Muslim, brown, and from an impoverished part of the world, apparently we're still okay with that in 2024. Women and children make up about 90% of those who have been killed. Even Hamas kills less civilians per ratio. The UN Palestinian Relief Agency, UNRWA, estimated that 1.9 million people had been internally displaced. Nearly 85% of the population. If Israel was bombing the UK, you're looking at 59 million British people. 59 million people. Let's pause a second. Made refugees overnight. Practically the whole country. That didn't even happen during the Second World War. The UN Secretary General has described Gaza as a graveyard for children. UN official Andrew Gilmore deems kill rates in Gaza highest in the world since the Rwandan genocide. Israel's military is killing Palestinians at an average rate of 250 people a day. The US fighting ISIS killed 20 civilians a day, while the Battle of Mosul killed fewer than 40 civilians a day. The former Pentagon intelligence analyst Mark Garlasco said, to find a similar density of high explosives used in a small populated area, we might have to go back to the Vietnam War. Gaza is now the most dangerous place in the world to be a child, according to the United Nations Child Agency, UNICEF. According to UN, Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war. Human Rights Watch also says Israel's war on Gaza has included acts of collective punishment that amount to war crimes. Data from conflict tracking group Air Wars suggests that the US-led coalition against ISIS in Iraq carried out 15,000 strikes in 3 years. The Israeli military has carried out 22,000 in Gaza in less than 3 months. According to US intelligence assessments seen by CNN, in this war, Israel had dropped more than 29,000 bombs on Gaza since the war began in mid-December, with 40 to 45% of those unguided. I think you get the picture. You can hardly get a more open and shut case in terms of an obvious moral evil perpetrated by one side, Israel, against another, Palestine. It's been called the first genocide of the TikTok generation. Remember, unlike Rwanda or Srebrenica or indeed the Holocaust, we don't have the excuse of ignorance. Social media has done away with that. These facts are indisputable. But I noticed something strange. While the whole humanitarian body of opinion is against Israel and is rightly outraged, our supposed humanity-hugging ex-Muslims are rooting for Israel and the camp led by, wait for it, right-wing extreme fascists like Benjamin Netanyahu, Yulav Gallant, Herzog, Smoterich and Ben Gvir. Here are some of the most vile things these Zionist supremacists are doing, that our humanitarian ex-Muslims here are rushing to condone, give cover to, and endorsing. Israel is shooting starving civilians in aid lines.
100 people were killed while waiting for food in Gaza.
They're attacking hospitals on a false pretense.
Israeli occupation army invaded Shifa after having strangulated, bombed, shelled, killed people inside. And what did they find? Nothing.
They're trying to disband UNRWA on a false charge, so millions of refugees don't get basic medicine, food, and life-saving treatment.
The claim that Prime Minister Netanyahu and others are making that somehow UNRWA is a proxy for Hamas are just flat-out lies. That's a flat-out lie.
They're using starvation as a weapon of war and creating a man-made famine.
It's a slow motion massacre of people to subject them to the kind of deprivation of food and water that they have been subjected to for the last 6 months.
The United Nations has warned that people like him are being intentionally starved by Israel.
So what on earth are these liberal, peace-loving... Now, let me finish what I'm about to say. Bro, I know their BS is just too much, but I need you to be quiet for a second, okay? So what are these peaceful, humanitarian ex-Muslims doing supporting and giving cover to a fascist ideology that has imposed apartheid and occupation for over 70 years and is literally committing a genocide as we speak?
It's widely recognized that Israel is an apartheid state, and furthermore, it is engaging in a genocidal campaign.
They're literally regurgitating Israeli government and IDF talking points. See if you can spot which one is the Israeli spokesman and which one's our humanitarian ex-Muslim.
Israel killing Palestinian civilians is moral equivalent of the Allied forces killing Germans in World War II.
You know, I don't think during the Second World War, when the Allies were bombing the Germans, and the Japanese, people claimed that if you continue bombing Germans and Japanese, you'll raise a new generation of Nazis.
The more civilians or Palestinians die, the better it is for Hamas and even Muslims in general.
For Hamas, civilian casualties are a strategy.
The better it is for Hamas.
Civilian casualties are a strategy.
The better it is for Hamas. This is why Israel does more than any other army in the world to minimize civilian casualties.
There is no army in the world that acts in a more moral fashion than the army of Israel.
So I hope Israel should go into Rafah.
It requires entering Rafah and eliminating the terrorist battalions there.
Israel's purpose is not to maximize civilian casualties.
About the civilians there, we're doing everything we can to minimize.
Brown skin's a bit of a giveaway, right? Now, watch how the UN expert for Palestine, who actually knows what she's talking about, takes down this pathetic propaganda of our Pakistani Zionist friend.
Israel's executive and military leadership and soldiers have intentionally distorted rules of international humanitarian law, distinction, proportionality, and precaution in an attempt to legitimize genocidal violence against the Palestinian people.
Our Pakistani Zionist is categorically stating Israel doesn't target civilians intentionally. So why is literally the whole world watching Israel kill innocent people who pose no threat? He must think we are all blind as well as stupid.
The moment 4 unarmed Palestinians were killed by an Israeli drone in Khan Yunis.
Fact, Israel targets innocent people. For example, it regularly targets brave aid workers.
Next thing I wanted to ask you about is the 196 other aid workers who have been killed in Israeli strikes.
And journalists.
Since then, at least 95 journalists have been killed in the region, 90 of whom are Palestinian.
And hospitals.
And out of 34 hospitals, I believe now it's 6 or 8 that are partially operating.
The immoral thing about this Zionist ex-Muslim isn't just that he's lying by saying Israel doesn't target civilians, it's that he knows he's lying. Oh yes, just like the IDF, propagandists, they know they're lying too. They all do. And guess what? They don't care that we know that they're lying, because their careers, lives, their values and aspirations are built around them in a way that professional lying is incentivized. You get promoted and various perks and brownie points, not by telling the truth, but by how many people you can gaslight. Do you think these shameless people care they'll inevitably get found out for lying? They know the world will soon move on, and by then they will have been well immersed for their immoral work. People do far more than risk losing like a fool for fame and intelligence. Heck, they sleep with their bosses and kiss ass all day to get ahead in life. For atheists who don't believe in shame and honor, lying is like breathing and a tiny price they're happy to pay to make their lives materially richer. Like the right-wing press, they're also demonizing the freedom struggle of the Palestinians and their right to protest as if they were on the Israeli government payroll.
The left constantly keeps on getting in bed with these far-right Islamist fascists.
These protesters want a stop to the bloodshed. So why is our ex-Muslim humanitarian hell-bent against a ceasefire? Oh, I get it. She wants to see more dead Muslim babies dying without incubators and infant formula. In one way or another, these ex-Muslims have shown a scandalous lack of humanity, honor, shame and sympathy for the suffering of the innocent Palestinians, and I find that remarkable considering how the entire point of their social media contract, if you like, is predicated on picking moral holes in Islam from a secular humanitarian standpoint. Forgive me, but what am I missing? Somebody please enlighten me. I'm obviously too savage to understand. This useful idiot from the ex-Muslim tribe has even gone on to encourage Israel to be more aggressive in its ethnic cleansing.
So what do you guys think about the conflict? And I say what I always say. I say, well, I think Israel should be much harsher. What do I think of the Israeli settlements in the West Bank? I think lots of them are completely justified.
So now I'm thinking it can either be one of two things. Either these ex-Muslims have all become right-wing fascists since October the 7th, or they were never liberal and tolerant to begin with. The first is unlikely, and the second more probable. First up, we have to stop assuming that anybody who leaves Islam is inherently a compassionate human being. For example, here is that same ex-Muslim buffoon thinking it's funny that thousands of Palestinian newborn babies, pregnant women, the disabled and elderly are being blown to pieces via Israeli bombs.
Bombs kill people.
Whoa, did you know that?
Do? Wait, whoa. Did he say bombs kill people?
Yeah, I had no idea.
I wonder how Apis and David Wood would feel if their own children, their wives and parents and grandparents were blown to pieces, body parts flung 30 feet apart, mixing with another person's crushed parts, so it's impossible to recognize. Imagine as a father having to wade through a mixture of fingers and scalps and finding your child to be one of them. This is the child you personally raised. All those sleepless nights, feeding time, the cuddles and laughs, all those personal stuff. Imagine the heartbreak of finding your child's body strewn all over. AP and David Wood don't have it in them to bring other people's children into the same emotional space as their own. Yes, David Wood had always happily played the sympathy card whenever he needed tens of thousands of dollars for his sick child's treatment. He wants other people to care enough to pay him truckloads of money, but he's not prepared to extend the courtesy back. This type of behavior, frankly, displays the most degenerate, hypocritical limits of human nature. It's a total collapse. It's tribalism 101 from the caveman times. Anyone outside their little circle is dehumanized and dismissed in a sick throwaway joke. You'd have to be a pretty vile human creature to find this sort of tragedy funny, and then to live stream it to thousands of equally depraved psychopaths egging you on. Oh, and look, the equally, quote, sweet and humanitarian infidel Nazi is hosting and laughing along with this vile creature. I'm beginning to wonder if any of them are psychologically normal. Being a swamp monster seems to go hand in hand with being an ex-Muslim. I made a video about her shocking fascist views a while ago. She's a very extreme right-wing Islamophobe in her own right, so it's not surprising they'd find solace in each other's company, birds of a feather and all that. It's always assumed that ex-Muslims are all secular humanitarians, and it's largely because they intentionally, that is, ex-Muslims, go out of the way to market themselves as some sort of super enlightened, compassionate humanitarians so that they can deceive the Western audience into sympathizing with their cause. And to make their Islamophobia more palatable, they play up their liberal credentials and virtue signal like there's no tomorrow.
Because Sharia is a totalitarian ideology, much like Chinese Communist Party or Kim Jong-un's Democratic Republic of North Korea. Acknowledging and respecting human rights will end up respecting you, your life, and that of your loved ones.
But a marriage that you're proposing ensures that a woman is subservient to her husband, she can be disciplined and raped.
The barbaric and outdated teachings of Islam. Sharia being one of the most troublesome, which has clearly no place in the 21st century.
According to the Quran, according to the Hadith, if she refuses to let her husband sleep with her, the angels will curse her all night long.
I'm trying to educate them about the dangers of Sharia, the barbarity, and at the same time making them realize the value of human rights.
Look at this ex-Muslim who constantly engages in selective outrage. She bangs on about Yazidi victims of ISIS and women victims of Hamas and Iran, which is fine, her right to do, but we've had 15,000 plus women and children intentionally murdered by the IDF and not a sympathetic peep out of her small hypocritical mouth for her sisters in humanity. Why the sympathy for non-Muslim women, but not Muslim? Well, because the IDF are her ideological friends. She only cares about female victims of Muslim atrocities. So it would be more accurate to say this ex-Muslim is not a liberal feminist at all, but a Muslim-hating Islamophobe. Recently, Sarah Khan, the Something for Something Social Cohesion, another fake job created by the right-wing Tories for their Islamophobia, published a report which stated free speech was being curtailed across the board by all extremists. This was her on Talk TV.
This is a much broader phenomenon which is poisoning the lifeblood of our political and civic life.
Well, guess what? By the time it reaches Nuria Khan and she sprinkles her Islamophobic magic all over it, the report has now exclusively morphed into Islamism wreaking havoc with UK democracy and nothing to do with far-right extremism. Do you see how these ex-Muslims are hell-bent on twisting the truth and making life difficult for everyday Muslims? And guess what? At the same time, supporting far-right fascism. Social media is all just an ongoing PR campaign for them to establish a platform to spew hate. Why else are they all enlightened humanitarians only when it comes to Islam, but when their fascist buddy Israel is doing the war crimes, the genocide, the apartheid, according to Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the ICJ.
And in January, in a remarkable ruling, the ICJ found it plausible that Israel's acts could indeed amount to genocide.
They're more than happy to embrace a supremacist right-wing regime literally committing a genocide. In fact, the majority of the average public want to see a ceasefire, which is understandable because that's the only sane thing to do. All the independent humanitarian bodies like UNICEF, the UN, Amnesty also want a ceasefire. So tell me, in what planet are these ex-Muslims enlightened by any liberal standard? The bottom line is, their game is up. They've been found out, exposed as fake liberal hypocrites and calculating liars by this slaughter in Gaza.
We are total hypocrites, and it's hard to disagree with the rest of the world.
The reason they are blind to their hypocrisy and frankly deluded is because they abandon an objective moral code, which is designed to stand the test of time, doesn't bow to peer pressure, cultural trends, and self-aggrandizement. Instead, they chose a morality based entirely on whims and desires. So when they had to choose between their so-called, in bold quotation marks, unshakable principles on the one hand and their warmongering friends, of course they're going to side with their fascist Islamophobic tribe because there's no ulterior set of principles to keep them in check. When their friends become fascists, they become fascists. When their friends become war criminals, they become war criminals. They have no objective morality, like Islam, alhamdulillah, to enforce their principles. Believe me, given their secular ideology and vacuous worldview, this was inevitable. Look, don't get me wrong, even Muslims will sometimes fail to live up to their ideals. But when a Muslim fails, he knows he's failing because his objective morality will say so, and he will hopefully course correct. But for atheists and secularists like them, they don't have a backstop. If they feel good in themselves, if the most important person in the world is happy with it, they're fine with being a professional hypocrite. They just move the goalpost and problem solved. And that's why even though they damn Islam 24/7 to scrape together a living, when they really have to put their money where their mouth is, when it's one of their own doing the genocide, the war crimes, the apartheid, they're too cowardly to call it out because that'd mean the most important person in the world, them, losing followers and a precious income stream built on hate. Their luxury, their decadence, their comfort takes priority over any principle any day of the week. Well, what do you know? That's the definition of hypocrisy based on subjective morality. The bottom line is, by your own words and actions, you've all proven to the world that your so-called principles literally mean jack all to you. Therefore, your existence is built on jack all. So you stand for nothing, nor genuinely believe in anything. You are a textbook case of a nihilist. This is precisely the end game of subjective morality. This is what happens when you leave Islam. You become Satan's bitch. You pick and choose based on the direction of the wind. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you are miserable. Your word, your bond, your vow, your morality is for sale. What a pitiful, depressing life. This is misery on earth personified. You're not just wandering in a confused fog of hypocrisy. You're also living in a bubble of false morality. You're twice damned, and Allah mentions this. As for the one who disregards my message, he will have a miserable life, and we resurrect him on the day of resurrection blind. A lot of people assume that the misery in this ayah is referring to God's wrath raining down because they dared to turn their backs on Islam. Now, that is not to say God hasn't dramatically destroyed people and nations in the past. He has. But in this instance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using the word miserable to describe the ongoing existential crisis of someone who's abandoned Islam. No, you may still go on living an outwardly normal life, but your subjective outlook will be drastically curtailed as a form of punishment. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in chapter 20 verse 127, we thus requite those who transgress and refuse to believe in the revelations of their Lord. But of course, even this misery is nothing compared to the misery that awaits. The retribution in the hereafter is far worse and everlasting. Again, let's go a little deeper in Islam. The greatest misery isn't death, poverty, or say a sickness. It's to be removed from the blessings and guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't be fooled by the outward lifestyle of these ex-Muslims. They may look comfortable, but they've lost something far more important than all that. That invaluable quality that makes us uniquely human and ethical. When our moral compass is tarnished and we're no longer able to deduce the moral from the unethical, and we're now about to go through life making all the wrong choices, then frankly, we are royally screwed. To lose that ability is to live in a state of abject misery and confusion. Ibn Kathir rahimahullah explains this ayat about this wretched lot like this. Quote, for verily his heart will not have pure certainty and guidance. He will be in agitation, bewilderment and doubt. He will always be in confusion and a state of uncertainty. This is from the hardship of life concerning his statement. Fir'aun considered himself a god, yet because he couldn't distinguish right from wrong, his flawed tyrannical character led to his total destruction. Till this day, until Qiyamah, his name will be spat upon. So do not be fooled by the comfortable lifestyles of these ex-Muslims like Fir'aun. It means nothing, and it won't save them unless they change. The ex-Muslim community is experiencing a total collapse and hemorrhaging of morality and its sense of humanity. It has totally lost its way. Even the so-called Islamists you all despise, who went on Piers Morgan defending the innocent that you say are anti-humanity, etc., are on the right side of history. Ask yourself why. How is it the one thing you think you're good at, loving humanity, is the very thing the Muslims are beating you on? What makes a Muslim side with humanity, and what makes you side with barbarism? The difference? Muslims have a moral code that values sanctity of all life, whereas you atheists have self-interest and self-preservation. Face it, your morality or lack of it is the cause of your moral catastrophe today, and that's why it's not Muslims but you ex-Muslim atheists who will go down in history as genocide enablers and genocide sympathizers. So how did it happen? I think a lot of them are victims of what we once called falling in love with your masters. Let's not beat around the bush. The West are technologically and financially superior to Asia and the Middle East. They're our masters. It's sad but true. They control all the international bodies, like the UN, NATO, IMF, World Bank, etc. Western culture dominates Hollywood, music, food and fashion. Did you think a certain segment of people originating from the global south and now living in the West wouldn't inevitably get insecure in their own skin and want to switch sides? This always happens. There are always weak links in a chain. They see the allure of a more shiny, developed West, feel insecure, feel inferior, and think, because the West has superior technology, it must also have superior morality. This always happens when a powerful culture swamps a less powerful one. Back in the day, we called them traitors and turncoats, and I'm prepared to say they may have been on a genuine mission at first to right wrongs they perceived, but obviously very soon they fall into that cynical template of what others with sinister plans expect of them, and they stop being authentic. Like any tribe, when you join, you have to follow rules, and one core rule is that you give your existence value and meaning by seeing Muslims as savages. to raise yourself to the level of the quote civilized white European Western standard, you feel you have to contrast yourself against and dehumanize all Muslims. You are incentivized to hate Muslims and make them your enemy. You lose all sight of objectivity and become a grotesque caricature, not a free individual who's comfortable in their own skin. The dogma takes control. You have to love Israel. Muslims can't do anything right. West is the best. Liberal values are beyond reproach. Before you know it, you've joined a religious cult, where free thinking and individuality is curtailed by self-appointed priests and bishops who deride apostates.
I find Apostle Aladdin's version of activism or his style of communication very boring, frankly. I find it very nauseating. I find it very sleep-inducing, coma-inducing at times. I have never watched his videos.
And like Pope Urban II in 1095, they call for unholy war.
So what do you guys think about the conflict? And I say what I always say. I say, well, I think Israel should be much harsher.
Since they so desperately want to fit into the more white and European tribe, they feel they must go the extra mile to impress their new masters. Humanity? What humanity? Free speech? What free speech? They will literally say or do anything to get into the club, even throw away their whole life's principles, their whole life's mission under the bus. So it's funny how these ex-Muslims build their entire social media careers going on about the evils of Islam because of a few deaths from terrorism, stoning, honor killings, etc. Yet today, they're all condoning 40,000 deaths, a significantly higher number, at the hands of another religious extremist group. They say they're all about free speech and tolerance, yet here they are defending a regime that's killed about 80 journalists, killed Al Jazeera's journalist Shirin Abu Akleh, has prevented the free press from entering Gaza, and is banning Al Jazeera in Israel as we speak. This is AP sucking up to the Israeli media, craving acceptance with cap in hand. The conversation might as well have been scripted, it's that bad.
First off, I'm very impressed with Israel. I always had good thoughts and liked to research a lot about Israel and what this country has become, where it came from and all that. But coming here and seeing the country for myself, seeing the cities and the people for myself, I must say, my opinion of Israel has moved even further toward very positive. Because it's a very developed, very well taken care of country.
What, you think they like you because you showed an affinity for progressive thinking and sided with humanity? Believe me, they don't respect your likes as far as they can throw you. All they care about is how you can be exploited for their own ends. You provide them with a propaganda outlet for their Zionism, and that's it. That's your function, boy! That's why you saw pseudo-intellectuals like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Majid Nawaz, Salman Rushdie promoted up the food chain as soon as they started a career in snitching on their own people. And they have been exploited to that end ever since. These people are never talented. They only get ahead by selling their souls. Playing the useful idiot, the other side bolsters their influence and of course pays them handsomely for their services. These ex-Muslims are doing something similar but on a social media and on a slightly smaller scale. As ever, they have to toe the party line and tick all the right boxes before they're let in. You have to prove you're against Muslims by making friends with the enemies of Muslims. This is part of the course. So you will see someone like AP regularly dog whistle to evangelical Christians, Hindu nationalists, even though he's an atheist, and now you see him legitimizing Zionism and its genocide. This is the mother of all Western virtue signals, revering the Jews.
There is no other religion that actually teaches you to hate the Jews other than Islam. But Muslim propagandists and liars would never tell you about this.
Because of a prophecy said by Muhammad that we will fight the Jews and we will kill them, and they are so bad that even rocks and trees will say there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him.
In a funny way, these stupid ex-Muslims are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, they have to prove their anti-Muslim credentials by worshipping the ground any Jew walks on, but then they have no room for maneuver when some turn into fascists and commit a genocide against people you've always demonized. You can't abandon the Jews as you see it because they're your golden ticket, and you can't sympathize with innocent Muslims because they'll think you're still a Muslim. So they end up looking like the moral hypocrites they are. But are they really stuck between a rock and a hard place? Of course not. You can still love the Jews, hate the Zionists, war criminals, Hamas, and stand up for innocent people who are suffering at the hands of the Israeli military. It's called being real, authentic. and using your critical faculties and having a heart. Look, there's nothing wrong with saying, okay, Hamas committed war crimes by killing civilians, and therefore I sympathize with Israelis on this tragic point. No one wants innocent civilians to suffer, and that is a respectable position, great. But then you must be consistent with your principles and carry this logic through and apply it to the other side too, by saying that what Israel is doing now after October the 7th is not just a war crime, but it's 100 times worse. It's genocide. That's if you want to live up to your claim of being a true humanitarian. But you don't do that, do you? You completely leave out the genocide, focus entirely on the suffering of Israelis. You even encourage Israel to go harder in their genocide and ethnic cleansing. I forgot. For that you need courage and principles, and this lot don't have any. And that's why they personify the worst kind of misery. Just look how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has just exposed them and placed them in this miserable and morally bankrupt position. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He will do this to the corrupted. Quote, "We will direct him towards misery." Just look at how that fake liberal mask has slipped, and you've been disgraced before the world by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the ones who are the real fascists. In an ironic twist of fate, by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the best of planners, despite your high-minded rhetoric you bombard your audience and gas yourself up with, you find yourself in the opposite corner to the very secular institutions, the UNHCR, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the UN, various NGOs, Doctors Without Borders, Red Cross, Red Crescent, ICJ, that embody the very Enlightenment values you claim, we now know falsely, to have left Islam for. So let's be clear. You didn't leave Islam because you're humanitarian or liberal, or you're enlightened or compassionate. Or you'd be in the same camp as those organizations that exist to single-mindedly serve humanity. These humanitarian independent bodies are calling out Hamas and Israel war crimes for what they are. And yet you, the so-called I'm too ethical and moral to be a Muslim, are unabashedly supporting the fascist right-wing war criminal regime of Israel, literally committing a genocide, subhanallah. If this isn't moral misery, if this isn't a total moral collapse, I don't know what is. My advice, stop being hypocrites, change, or be doomed.